Welcome to this James the Bike Guy, where today we're getting to take a look at a trail bike from Salsa. This in front of us here is the Salsa Horsethief Deore. So this is a all-mountain trail bike with 140 millimeters of front suspension, 120 millimeters of rear, and some modern progressive geometry that we're going to get into the specs and features of, as well as find out exactly what it weighs. So if this kind of thing is interesting to you, I suggest you stick around and let's check out this bike together. Talking Salsa Horsethief. So this bike has been in Salsa's lineup for a little bit of time, and this is the third generation of this frame. Now, the Salsa Horsethief operates as their all-mountain trail bike with some XC performance out of the split pivot rear suspension, but modern trail geometry and lots of travel with 140 mils up front and 120 millimeters out back. And Salsa is a brand owned by QBP, which is a large distributor of bike parts and based out of Minnesota. And they make some pretty neat bikes to fill gaps and voids where the rest of the market doesn't quite have. And that is essentially what we have here. This really mixes up the trail and all mountain category into one mix of a bike that should have a wide range of capability, but also still pedal really well with the split pivot. Now, speaking of split pivot, that's kind of the most important piece of this aluminum frame from Salsa. Out back, this is a split pivot design, which is a Dave Weigel design, and it has a concentric bearing that the rear through axle runs on. So here, both the seat stay and the chain stay connect up on this rear axle, and then it's linkage driven to the metric shock in the middle of the bike. And what that allows for is effectively you have zero compromise as far as braking performance is concerned. It is a progressive leverage ratio, so your small bump compliance comes out really nice. But you also have a fair bit of anti-squat built in, so it's going to pedal well. And as it comes up to the bottom out, that progressivity really strengthens the bottom out performance as well. Now, these split pivot designs are effectively a linkage driven single pivot setup. So it's a modified single pivot, which is above the 1x crankset. And this bike is designed around a 30 and a 32 tooth chainring for the anti-squat numbers going out back to this wide range 12 speed. So that is fairly neat on the bike, but to make it even a little more adjustable, the bike also features a flip chip, which is slid right inside of the rear link kit. You can almost see in this video here where there's a separate piece inside of there, but as we cut away to the picture of what it looks like, it allows you to set the shock position, that rear mount, into high and low position. What that effectively does is it allows you to customize the geometry of the bike to how you want it to feel on the trail for yourself. And in fact, let's talk a bit about this. So this particular bike in front of us is a size extra large, but for a geometry comparison, let's talk about a size medium. And in a medium, the top tube length is going to be 618 millimeters, your effective top tube. And then your head tube angle is going to be 66.8 degrees in low or 67 degrees in high. Then the seat tube angle is going to be 73.4 degrees low, 73.6 degrees high. And then your chainstay length comes in at 432 millimeters. Now, those geometry numbers are all based around this bike coming with a 50 millimeter stem stock. So every bike in their size lineup comes with a 50 millimeter stem, and the Geo is designed around going 40 to 60 millimeters to stay within spec of how they want the bike to ride. The other bits of adjustability that are built into this bike is going to come into wheel size. And factory, the bike is coming through expecting 29-inch wheels, and in fact can run anything from a 29er by 2.2 all the way up to 29 by 2.6. But the bike can also accommodate 27.5-inch plus wheels. So if you did a 27.5-inch wheel and tire combination, you could rock a 2.8 to 3.0 width. So if you're still riding the 27.5 plus like many people are, that's a pretty cool upgrade and swap out that you can do to the bike. And part of how they're able to make that happen is back in this rear end. So this bike features what's called Super Boost, or basically it's 12 millimeter diameter through axle going through and 157 millimeters wide. Standard boost is 148 millimeters wide, and so that extra bit of width in the back end allows for a larger tire size should you need it. Also, a little extra stiffness to go along with. Now, out on the trail, you may want to be carrying some stuff with you. This also makes that pretty easy with a water bottle mount for both seat tube and down tube. They claim you can fit a full-size water bottle. It does have that extra third mount down below, so should you want to run a frame bag, you can do that. And it does have a mount on the top to be able to run a top tube bag as well. Love to see that on the bike, along with all internal cable routing. Makes for a pretty sweet looking rig. The suspension, of course, connected up to this bike. This being the Deore version will be a bit more on the value side, and for that we've got a RockShox 35 fork. This 35 fork features 35 millimeter wide stanchions, so nice beefy stanchions like the Revelation and Pike forks as well. And it is air adjustable, 140 millimeters of travel up front with a 42 millimeter offset. And the rear suspension is controlled via this RockShox Deluxe Select Plus. And that rounds out the frame and the geometry of this bike. And I think it's time, let's find out the specs. And diving into the specs, as I mentioned just a bit earlier with the suspension, this being the Deore model means that this is the least expensive in the range. Now, obviously, this is not an inexpensive bike, so it is starting with mid-level or better components, but the drivetrain is going to be composed of a Deore 12-speed drivetrain. So this is going to be 12 speeds operating through an 11 to 51 tooth cassette, and then as we drive forward, it has a FSA crankset. This is the FSA Comet crankset. Comes with a 30-tooth chainring, of course one bi-specific, and it does have a threaded bottom bracket, as well as you can see just below the crank that it's got mounts for an ISCG bash guard. Awesome to see, one bi-specific, very nice drivetrain for the bike. And then shifting is done on the handlebar with a thumb button to go to an easier gear, index finger or thumb below to go to a harder gear. And then it begins to be slowed down via some Shimano hydraulic disc brakes. These are the MT4100 hydraulic discs, 2-piston calipers clamping down on center lock rotors. And those rotors are mounted up on some WTB hubs that are laced up 32 spoke to the WTB ST I30 rims. These are 30 millimeter internal width rim, tubeless ready, although they come out of the box with tubes. And you have a Maxxis Minion DHR2 on the back in 29 by 2.4. And up front is the Minion DHF in a 29 by 2.5. Last things to talk about, of course, are going to be the cockpit setup, in which case we've got a combination of Salsa and race face for handlebars. So you've got a race face handlebar, you do have the Salsa stem, and something that's actually really neat about this stem is the stem cap itself. This is the tool to be able to tighten or loosen that rear dropout. So the split pivot design uses these nuts that go around the bearing setup to keep everything snug together. And in case that were to get loose or you need to do service just in general, it's pretty cool that that's built into the top cap that can be removed and used for that purpose. Out back is a WTB Volt saddle, and then it's going to be mounted up on a dropper seat post, which does have an integrated travel adjust, where when you unthread this collar, you can adjust how high or low the dropper goes. And specifically, the dropper actuated via the Shimano lever on the handlebar. What ends up happening is when you pull that lever, dropper can rise right up. With your body weight on, pushing the lever down, it'll drop back down as well. And if you need to adjust the height, you're able to unthread this. There's a plastic collar inside you can change the position of, and it all gets adjusted. Well, anyways, now that we've taken a look at all those features and designs of this bike, I say it's time to find out what this bike weighs. The actual weight of the Salsa Horsethief Deore comes in and weighs 36.22 pounds. Well, thanks for joining me to check out the Salsa Horsethief Deore. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. While you're at it, be sure to hit subscribe and browse the channel to see other videos like this to check out as well.